Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. After U.S. plans to attack Yemen on a chat app were exposed, what's been revealed about the inner workings of the Trump administration and its policies? Let's get to the bottom line. This week, the White House was in full damage control mode, trying to brush off an embarrassing leak on national security. It all started 2 weeks ago as the U.S. prepared to launch airstrikes on Yemen, and the country's top military, political, and intelligence leaders joined a chat group on the Signal app to discuss this attack. Besides the fact that top officials are supposed to use secure communications for this kind of sensitive information, a journalist from the Atlantic magazine was somehow included in the group. This week, the magazine published those texts. So what do they reveal about U.S. policy aims in the Middle East and Europe? And what does the entire episode tell us about how the Trump administration works? Today, we're talking with Alex Wagner, who served as an Assistant Secretary of the Air Force and a Chief of Staff to the Secretary of the Army, among other positions in the Pentagon, and journalist Kevin Barron, who covers U.S. defense and national security, and he's now the founder of Elevation Global Strategies. Thank you both for talking to me today. Kevin, let me just ask you, is this a tempest in a teacup? Is this a small deal? Or is this a real, legitimate national security issue? Because it is playing like a storm.
This is a really big deal. No teacup. This is huge. And that's the reason why everyone is talking about this. I mean, I covered the Pentagon for 15 years on the beat. Never would I imagine, much less have we seen something like this, where so carelessly national security leaders from several agencies on a messaging app talking about a strike that everyone thinks.
So to remind our audience, we had a bunch of national security issues. We had the Secretary of Defense. We had the Director of National Intelligence. We've had, the Chief of Staff of the White House. Quite a number of people on Signal. Now, many of us use Signal, and I want to remind people, Signal is a nonprofit, and it takes donations. It's not a profit-making platform. I wonder if there are actually donors to Signal, using this. But all of these people were on a commercial app that is not a nonprofit app, that is not cleared for national security use, right?
I mean, they're on an app that the National Security Council and the Defense Department warned their own people within the previous weeks not to use, because it is not secure, at least at that level that you would expect for things like an airstrike, timestamps, weapons, all the things that just are not supposed to be on cell phones.
Now, Alex, you've worked in the national security base. You've worked in and out of the Pentagon for years. I've known you for a very long time. You've been in and out of that space. I've seen other times, whether it was Hillary Clinton in a server in her bathtub, or other officials that ended up using their private phones. How normal would it be for people, for convenience or for whatever reason, to use their personal equipment and an app that they just found to be more convenient? Is that a behavior that you've seen a lot of in your experience?
Well, Steve, if this were a part of an episode of Veep, I wouldn't have believed it. I think it would probably have been struck from the script. It is the most insane thing I think I could have possibly imagined happening, particularly at that level, right? This is the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, and the one person you didn't mention was on that chain is the Vice President of the United States. I'll tell you, I have Signal on my phone. I've used it. I typically use it when I leave the Pentagon, when I left the Pentagon, to arrange, hey, are you going to this event together tonight? Or can I get a ride somewhere? Or what are you doing this weekend? Or I just wrote something, an op-ed. Would you be interested in seeing it? The last thing I would ever do is talk about professional things, my work responsibilities on Signal. And I largely dealt with unclassified things. I remember when I first got to the Pentagon, they said, Alex, if you put it on the unclassified system or even the secret system, you should assume the Chinese are reading it.
Well, let's listen to President Trump's take on this.
But that's an app that a lot of people use, and somebody got on. I mean, happened to know the guy's a total sleazebag. The Atlantic is a failed magazine. Does very, very poorly. Nobody gives a damn about it. This gives it a little bit of a shot. And I will tell you this, that they've made up more stories. And they're just a failing magazine. The public understands that. He's a very good man. That man is a very good man right there that you criticize so strongly.
So truth in advertising, I used to be an editor at The Atlantic. Kevin, you worked at Atlantic Media. We both worked with Jeffrey Goldberg, the so-called sleazebag in question. who is editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. So I'm interested in your take.
There's a long history of why the president doesn't like The Atlantic and doesn't like Jeff Goldberg. One will be The Atlantic, one of America's oldest magazines and publications, took the extraordinary step the first time Trump ran for president, and they endorsed his opponent, Hillary Clinton. And the second time around, they also endorsed his opponent. So we know that that history is there. But it is absolutely extraordinary the way that the White House has pivoted to just attack the media as much as they can. And especially, like you said, specifically Jeff, specifically, there's a real vitriolic way to do it when he just received their own mistake. Now, there's a lot there. And as a military reporter, I've written over the years how it's really troubling when military reporting and national security reporting is criticized in this kind of a way, because we have a professional class of officers in the military, professional intelligence officers, professional diplomats who come up the ranks and they take cues from their senior leaders who often teach them how to relate to the media and the importance of the freedom of the press. And almost every other defense secretary I've covered for 15, 20 years before Pete Hegseth has left office giving some kind of praise to the press corps of the Pentagon, some kind of praise to America's free press to say this is how important it was that they do their job to cover national security in the United States. So to try to make this as some kind of vendetta of the Atlantic against Trump, it just holds no water when you see the facts in front of you.
We heard the Secretary of Defense not only demean the journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg in this case, but said that there was nothing classified in this, that there were no war plans that were done. Now, you may call them war actions or military actions or get lost in semantics.
Call them war plans, it doesn't matter.
But the point is, I would
yeah.
like to know, if you look at these texts, which I hope everyone does because you can, and you usually can't see stuff like this, what would be classified if not this?
I mean, it's not surprising any of this coming from Trump, who has denigrated the media from day one. It is surprising from someone like Waltz, who we were told was supposed to be one of the more responsible people to come into the administration. And for a long time, people thought he was going to be the defense secretary. And before that, he was shifted to national security advisor, and we ended up with Hegseth, who has no experience whatsoever. So if Waltz is supposed to be the adult in the room, his responses are just as troubling. As for Jeff, I've said out there too, I'm so thankful that Jeff is being praised for acting responsibly and not revealing classified information at first, not holding back the name of intelligence officer. But I want to remind folks, that's how all defense and national security reporters operate. When I was on the beat, almost every day, you're privy to some kind of sensitive level of information just by the nature of being inside the Pentagon or traveling with the defense secretary or the Air Force secretary or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Things like where you're going, where you're staying, the days you're leaving, especially back in the war years when we were all going in and out of Afghanistan or Iraq and other areas. There's a bit of an unwritten understanding with reporters, sometimes it is written and you have to sign off on it, that you will keep those secrets because it's for not just your own safety, it's for the safety of the Americans that you're covering anyway. So this is the norm of professionalism and journalism that Jeff Goldberg has demonstrated.
Almost every single person knows that they were discussing very sensitive national security information, mostly on their private phones, on a private app. What are the incentives to do that?
It's a great question, Stephen. While I appreciate being sandwiched between two journalists talking about the journalistic issue, I've spent a career as a national security professional and a lawyer. And what I'll tell you first and foremost is the American people should be breathing a sigh of relief that those Navy pilots weren't shot out of the sky.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing is, and it's as clear as day, the countries that have the capability to read those messages that are being passed on an unclassified forum are Iran and Russia, two states that are supporting, China and Russia, two states that are supporting Iran, the Houthis' principal backer. So the idea that you're going to have this type of conversation on an unclassified app that our adversaries have clear and clean access to if they wanted to should be our first and foremost concern, and we really dodged a bullet. The second thing is accountability. I mean, this is what is so bizarre to me. Every single person in the military, whether you're in uniform or whether you work in the Defense Department's civilian corps, has to go through this terribly annoying but incredibly important training called cybersecurity awareness training. And not only do you have to do it in the beginning, you have to do it annually. Not only do you have to do it when you start, but every single level, including me and my last job as Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, remember as my senior military assistant blocking off a portion of my calendar so I could complete this training. They all should know better. Now, what's unusual about this administration? We have people who have never worked in government before, people who have no idea how government works, from the Treasury Secretary to others who have only worked at the lowest levels in the military, like Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard. They should still know better, because I promise you they've had to do those training themselves. And so what's the answer? The only conceivable answer is either a far-fetched theory that somehow they're playing three-dimensional chess, or that they're lazy. And despite the fact that the Secretary of Defense, and I know this because Assistant Secretaries of Defense have installed in their homes secret computers, sometimes drilled into the concrete so they can't be taken away. But I promise you the Secretary of Defense on a Saturday has access to that computer. I promise you that he can get driven into the Pentagon and be in the Situation Room. And the last thing I promise you is that if Barack Obama had been doing the Osama bin Laden raid on Signal, he would have probably been impeached.
Well, let me ask you about the laziness factor here for a minute. What if the United States were responding in a contingency to China in a Taiwan standoff, or the United States were deciding to take military action against Greenland, or some other, or Panama? I mean, that there was some other activity. Some have floated the idea that they were sort of reckless and lazy on this particular case because it was just Yemen, because it was a far-off, low-level issue, and we're going to bomb a small country and just not take it quite as seriously. That you couldn't imagine that if we were in a conflict directly with Russia or Iran or with China or other serious contingencies, that this would have happened. What's your thought on that?
I mean, when you engage in operational military action based on operational military plans, and American lives are at risk, you've got to take it seriously. You've got to take it seriously, and this is what the Situation Room and the basement of the West Wing was designed for. Each of those people have door-to-domicile car service. They can pick them up at their house and take them there. If it's an emergency situation, they can be on their secret or top-secret government email networks in their home. There is absolutely no excuse.
Kevin, I want to read to you two small clips of this fascinating exchange over Signal regarding Europe. And one is from J.D. Vance, and it's to Pete Hegseth. He says, "If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again." And in other words, this is an action for Europe, not necessarily for us. And Hegseth responds, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic," in all capital letters. The loathing of Europe in this is in all capital letters is really, really thick and viscous and serious and loaded. And I'm just interested what you think that does now. I mean, if that is not, because they said there's nothing classified in this, and maybe that's consistent with the position they took at the Munich Security Conference and others in the kind of arm's length distance that they are now imposing on a lot of relations with Europe. But I think that had an impact, another negative impact on transatlantic relations. What are your thoughts?
Of course it does. And a couple of things. One, it shows that the fact that these messages are being exchanged a couple of hours before the strike was supposed to happen, and they're still debating whether or not this is the president's policy. That's an alarm right there. That's literally the second to last hour before, you should know this by now. Secondly, so
to be clear to everyone, J.D. Vance did not want to proceed. He didn't think it was worth doing it because too little of America's goods go through that canal.
He said he'd defer to everybody, but he made his point that this might not be the president's policy. Like, how do you not know that this is the president's policy or not? Before you get to the Europeans, the second part is what you said. If this team doesn't understand why stopping the Houthis is beneficial to U.S. security, why are they doing it? They're not doing it as a favor for Europe. It's clear.
No, but they believe they are doing it. I mean, they actually talk about charging Europe,
right,
and getting reimbursed by Europe for this
so then
action.
They're misunderstanding
without Europe being in the chat. Europe was not on the Signal chat list.
Right. They're misunderstanding the purpose of the United States military, which is to protect and defend against, or protect and defend American interests. One of those being U.S. economic interests. I used to joke when I was a Pentagon reporter that if war did break out, you mentioned Taiwan, in the South China Sea, in the Taiwanese Strait, and the South China Sea was shut off, how long would it be before the United States ran out of its own underwear or clothing or whatever items that the United States doesn't make but relies on China to make? That's just an economic interest. Is the United States really going to go to war to reopen shipping lanes for something like that? And the answer of the Pentagon was always, yes, 100%. That is our mission. That's our constitutional duty. This is a major shipping lane. Now, if you know the whole story, a lot of it is because Iran wanted to somehow stop shipping was just for Israel. That's a whole other topic. But the idea that this somehow should have been Europe's to handle and not the Americans is wrong, is bad policy. It's also bad operational capability understanding, meaning there's a reason why the United States, and only the United States, has certain capabilities, and it's part of the agreed defense structure between the United States and NATO. The United States is the only one that has more than one aircraft carrier. The United States is the only country that has a significant aerial refueling capability. That's why, even if it was French jets, they need the Americans to operate. But that's by design. That's been part of the burden sharing that the United States and NATO have created for the last 50 years. This administration really wants to change that burden sharing. I understand that, but you can't do it in real time. And real experts, and you'll know too, have said that balance is really not going to shift for at least a decade. The Europeans have a lot more kit to build before they can carry out an operation like this on their own, even if that's what you wanted as good.
Alex, I have been waiting a couple of months now in the Trump administration to hear Republicans and Democrats on the same page on anything, and it turns out that this is the issue, at least for some Republicans. So Senator Roger Wicker, who's chairman of the Armed Services Committee, is very upset about what's going on, has called for a real investigation. Some Republicans behind the scenes are pushing Donald Trump to fire Mike Waltz, his national security advisor. The Democrats are making this a lead story every day. So just interested in whether or not, from your experience, from a Pentagon perspective, dealing with the legislative branch of government, do you think this is sound and fury that will finally matter, or is it going to signify nothing in the end?
Well, Steve, what I could tell you is, first and foremost, there are some real professionals on Capitol Hill who care about our nation's security on both sides of the aisle. In fact, two of those professionals were on that signal chain. Mike Waltz, who is on the Intelligence Committee in the House and the Armed Services Committee, and Marco Rubio, who was the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Both of those people should have known better.
And Tulsi Gabbard.
And Tulsi Gabbard. They all should have known better. And they didn't say anything. What does that say to me? This wasn't the first time they've had this kind of conversation on Signal.
I mean, I'll just show one little picture of an emoji. Mike Waltz said after this was all done, a fist bump and a little flame. So they're good at sending emojis as well. And this is the person that you said knows the intelligence field well. So do you think this is going to go away, or do you think, as you call for, heads will roll?
What I think is that first, and this is the most shocking thing to me, that what we have impressed on our DoD civilians and our military members is not good enough for the senior leaders. Any person I know, myself included, that took these types of actions in any form or shape would either be fired on the spot or had a criminal referral to the Department of Justice or be court-martialed. I was the head of personnel for the Air Force and the Space Force. I saw officers getting in trouble all the time, removed from the promotion list for far, far less. I actually don't know how seriously those members of Congress are going to take it when it comes to holding them accountable. I haven't seen the partisan split that you describe, and I'm concerned that this will be turned into an issue of whether or not Jeff Goldberg had the right to be in that chat, rather than previewing operational military plans on an unsecured network moments before military action, putting our Navy pilots' lives at risk.
Kevin, let me ask you a little bit of a nuanced issue about J.D. Vance's perspectives. He was the most potent, robust, America First ideologue on that chat chain. Others were engaged in what was sort of largely a conventional anti-terror, let's take out someone, I hate to call it conventional, but I mean, we both know it is, in a sense that they were going to attack, a terrorist, and they designated that terrorist walking into his girlfriend's building and seeming to be fine with blowing up an apartment building, but also attacking those that were using rockets, etc. That doesn't sound to me like MAGA foreign policy that doesn't want to go search monsters and destroy them. You know, I'm just sort of interested in that tension between a typical American, strategic class and what J.D. Vance was articulating in that was, I don't know if our people are going to understand why we're doing this. I don't know why we're doing this to bail out Europe. So is there a deeper tension inside the national security establishment that we got a glimpse of because of the signal chat?
It's a good question. Very interesting. Perhaps. To follow his answer, I'll say this. I don't think anybody gets fired. I don't think anybody resigns. I think we have a whole lot of investigations and complaints, and this all goes away, and we just keep on business as usual with the Trump administration. Now, on the question of MAGAism and foreign policy, it's a good question. This goes back to the previous Trump administration, where Trump likes to say he's against foreign wars, but he likes to kill terrorists. He likes to say he doesn't want involvement in the Middle East, but he sure loves when he sends troops there to take somebody out to look as tough as possible. And this goes all the way up to even like the nuclear level. He likes to say the United States is in charge and is the biggest country and has the best military, but he wants other militaries to be more equal, to have just more spending.
Kevin, he likes to say he wants to fire people, and he likes firing people.
Yeah.
But after Mike Flynn, he's been really reluctant to do that.
That's right. So this kind of a strike, I think you're right. J.D. Vance makes a good point. If either they're going to make someone else do it, or you have to do it yourself. That's true also for defending Europe from Russia, for example. You can say all you want at Munich or anywhere else that you Europeans have to defend yourself, but there's only so much capability they have before the United States has to do something about it. The same goes for Taiwan, the same goes for Japan and South Korea and every other ally and partner that the United States has. So, and I think also it kind of reflects polling in the United States. When you ask Americans about foreign policy, depending on how you ask the question, you get lots of different answers. But for the most part, my understanding and reading of it has always been that Americans, they don't like to be engaged in long and deep foreign wars. They don't want Iraq again. They don't want Afghanistan. But they do like American troops overseas. They do like forward deploy. They do like small, hits like this one, where you can take out a terrorist and claim victory. So having it both ways might not be that hard for the Trump administration if they're smart about it.
Real quick, Alex, just in our last second, are we going to see more incidents like this from this administration?
My sense is that, as I said before, this is not the first time they've communicated on Signal. You'd think that the first time that was created, someone would have said, hey, wait a second, we need to take this somewhere else. I think cutting off that avenue might actually change how they do things, but I think the outrage and the shock, there's going to be a lot more to come.
Well, thank you. Former Pentagon official Alex Wagner, veteran reporter on defense and national security Kevin Barron, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
You bet.
Appreciate it, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? The first rule of chat groups, you may ask? Well, check who's on your chat group. This may seem like a small-time problem down the road, given the types of systemic mistakes demonstrated by so many of Trump's top leaders in this signal messaging controversy. But here are my 3.5 takeaways. Number one, you have to be highly naive or just plain derelict in your duties to think you can communicate about U.S. national security on your private phone or a messaging platform not cleared for secrecy. If Russia or China had made the same mistake, wouldn't America be listening? Number two, the White House has a hard time simply admitting mistakes. This whole episode could have gone away in one night if Trump or one of his officials had said, sorry, we screwed up and we'll do better. Number 2.5, Europe is in big trouble. The bias against Europe in these conversations is thick. Third, and this is just a hunch, this is probably not the end of the story. And that's the bottom line.